Good morning, everybody. Be kind to have your seats. The opening session is starting. My name is Hassan Ali. I have the honor of being associated to ERF and Nile University at the same time. I'm currently the chair of the board of the Economic Research Forum for the Arab country, Iran and Turkey. And I'm also honored to be the Dean of the Business School at Nile University. I'm happy to see a lot of old faces and new faces, old friends and new friends. This is a very important conference for me. And the very first session will have the keynote speaker by my colleague, Dr. Ibrahim Al-Badawi, the Managing Director of ERF. Before that, we will have also a welcoming note from Dr. Wael Aql, to my right, the President of Nile University. I'm going to make the introduction as we go. We have two distinguished colleagues, Ariane and Dr. Omar Al-Razzaz, who will be commentating. I'm going again to do the proper introduction as we go in the program. I have to say that I'm going to just give a brief information about a change in the session. We supposed to have Dr. Rania Al-Mashat as one of the commentators, but due to change in her schedule, she will be participating in the third plenary today from 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock. So she will be participating in the conference first day. She wanted also to participate as a research fellow rather than being representative of her position right now in the government. One more time, I'm going to start by an opening remark from myself, and then from Professor Wael Aql, and then we'll give the floor to Professor Ibrahim Al-Badawi, and then our two distinguished colleagues, Ariane Dehan and Omar Al-Razzaz, will be commentating. I don't know if I have to stand up, but I think it's not going to make a big of a difference in terms of height. But let me do that. This is a very important conference to me personally, as it gives me a great pleasure to welcome you on behalf of ERF and Nile University. These are unique institutions. They are serving very similar objectives. They are also founded on a set of core values that I found to be very similar and makes me really proud on the personal, professional, national, regional, and international levels. We are here today to discuss the most pressing economic issues of our time, and we have gathered some of the most influential minds in the field. Some of us as economists will be lured to go into executive positions, and some of us will stay in the advisory role and policy maker roles. People here are basically representing both kind of economists, and this is very important because it gives us the applied flavor. The topics we'll be discussing today and the next couple of days are ranging from basically the listed topics in the agenda that you have, but we will also be talking about the impact of economic policy on the global economy as a whole. We'll be talking about the role of technology on economic growth, and seeing some of you remind me that we have to talk about inequality and growth. So these all are going to be discussed. potential solutions will be offered. We'll be looking at the potential of new technology and the role of the government in economic development, and also the importance of international cooperation. Majority of these rules have been discussed either in the plenary session or in the parallel session. This is the flagship conference for ERF, and this is the 29th conference. So ERF is close to be 30 years old. 30 years old means that we are really maturing. We are just starting to be participating in the real life, so to speak. There is a lot of factors that I can talk about for hours here that makes ERF a unique institution. And also wearing the hat of Nile University. Everybody at Nile University know that when I first came about 5 years ago to Nile University, I said that this is the best kept secret in Egypt. And people now realize that this is true. Nile University started as well. It's even younger than ERF, but it has the sky as the limit. So we are very happy that you are here. And again, my own pleasure comes from the fact that we have the new generation very well represented, the new research fellows who are coming here for the first time, and we have the veterans who have been around for a very long time. I'm confident that the discussion that we will have in this conference will be informative, inspiring, and I look forward to hearing all of the thoughts and ideas that these sessions will represent. Thank you for joining us today, and I wish you all productive and successful conference. Now, there is no MC, so I'm playing also the role of an MC. And that reminds me with a story about a guy called Shansi. I was in a conference once, and Shansi was the MC. Shansi was a very colorful guy, and as he was introducing the speaker, the first speaker was the governor of Ohio. And he said that the speaker, I don't want to give the name, is pregnant with idea. It happened that the governor was a bit chunky and a bit overweight. So once he said that, the whole just started to laugh. So the governor took the stage, and he started by saying, I thank Chauncey for the introduction, and I am pregnant. I'm not sure if it is with idea. I'm not sure if it is something else, but I can tell you, if it is gases, I will call it Chauncey. Well, now I'm going to introduce my very good friend, Professor Wa'el Aql. Professor Wa'el Aql is the president of Nile University, and he also, starting very recently in August 21, taking the helm from the founding president, Professor Tariq Khalil. And Professor Wa'el Aql is a professor of mechanical engineering. He has served in many capacity in this university. As I was saying, the founding president, he just came in. Professor Tariq Khalil is the founding president of Nile University. Professor Wa'el has actually got his PhD from Maryland College Park in 2004. In the field of smart material, and Dr. Aql has been engaged in research work in the field of smart material and structure with over 48 international publications that focus on this field. He is very distinguished in the education field. Vocational education is basically has a lot of mark by the fingerprinting of Dr. Wael Al. I'm going to give Dr. Wael Al the floor to give us the opening remark. Please.
Thank you very much, Professor Hassan. It's really a great pleasure for me to be among this elite group of researchers and leaders in every aspect of the economic life, nationally, regionally, and globally. By the way, I too need to lose some weight also, like Chansey, so it's... yeah. Well, thank you very much actually for being here at Nile University, and it's a great honor for us. The Economic Research Forum is known for its prestigious impact on the decision makers in every aspect of the economic life, nationally and mostly regionally, actually. And I'm very proud to be a friend of Professor Hassan Ali, who is the board chair, and he is a distinguished professor at Nile University and professor at Ohio State University. It's interesting that Nile University is hosting the ERF here in Egypt, because Nile University, when it was established in 2006, it was established with a clear mind to have a sole objective, actually, to have an impact on the economy of Egypt. The tool it's using the technology, and it's using its outcomes, and it's using innovative ideas and approaches to have an economic impact. It's all about economy, eventually. It's all about wealth and well-being and welfare of the economy, which reflects on every aspect of life, nationally, regionally, and eventually globally. That's why when it was established in 2006, it has a presidential decree mandating particularly elements that will contribute to the economic well-being and economic growth in Egypt and the region. So in 2006, it was mandated, for example, that Nile University should be the hub for hosting all kinds of incubators and accelerators to support startups in order to have an economic impact eventually. And all is building on technology, because technology is actually the locomotive for the economic growth worldwide. It was actually also mandated that Nile University should have a unique partnership, integration between technology and the finance and economy, and that was manifested in establishing the School of Management of Technology at Nile University. When it was established, it has technology schools like School of Engineering, School of Computer Science, but also it has School of Business and a Graduate School of Management of Technology, in order to graduate leaders who should be able to carry out and to learn and to practice what is needed to deploy technology properly and to manage it properly for the sake of economic improvement. That's why we are very happy here at Nile University to host the ERF this year, and I thank Professor Hassan, and I thank all the distinguished leaders, the ministers, the prime ministers, and all the leaders of the prestigious entities represented at ERF for honoring us with their visit. I won't take long, but we are really very glad, and we find it very, very much adequate and suitable, and in our pleasure that we blend together the missions and the visions of both institutions together, because they are very much alike, and the sole objective of Nile University is the economic well-being, and I believe the ERF also has a mission for making it a better world, making it economically solid, and that reflects on every aspect of life, nationally, regionally, and globally. Thank you very much again for being here with us. Thank you very much for honoring us with hosting this wonderful event, and I'm quite sure we are all going to learn a lot about this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Wael. I'm going to give also the floor to Dr. Ibrahim El-Badawi for a welcoming remark first, and then for the keynote of the plenary session number 1 that has to deal with the MENA Commission on Stabilization and Growth, perspective and feedback from the policy community. First, couple of minutes, and then we'll move to the session.
Thank you, Professor Hassan. Good morning, everybody, our colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Let me first extend our thanks and appreciation on behalf of the ERF network to Professor Wael, the president of the Nile University, for hosting us, hosting this 29th annual conference, which is really the flagship event for ERF. And in fact, it takes a particular importance because the past three years, we were unable to come together physically as we have been doing since the last 30 years or close to 30 years since the initiation of the ERF. So we are very grateful for the opportunity to be hosted by a nascent and thriving university that is aspiring to promote technology and to develop knowledge, especially new information technology, and to develop an economy that is, for economy like the economy of Egypt, and the most populous country in our region. And this is really a great opportunity for us to celebrate the importance of knowledge. And you can see that actually we are doing this as part of our various sessions, including a session on digital transformation and technology. I would like to thank our chairman, Professor Hassan Ali, the chairman of our board, and of course, a long-time research fellow, for availing the opportunity for us to be, collaborate with the university and to hold this event. I would also like to welcome Dr. Omar Razaz and Mr. Ariandi Han, who contributed to this report that I will discuss shortly, and for their participation. I would like to say that this event takes an important significance for us because universities are the bread and butter of the research network like the ERF. So we are very happy that we are here the first time since the last 3 years, and we hope that we hold future events, and there are more universities to come that will be hosting us in the future. Mr. Chairman, let me very briefly give a perspective about what we have been doing in the year past, very briefly to brief our network. In addressing regional challenges, we continue to steadily be guided by our mission and commitment to promoting sustainable development towards a better future for our region for generations to come. In 2022, not only the global economy continued to reel from unprecedented consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic, the war on Ukraine had an equally devastating and lasting effects on all of us for years to come as well, fortunately. Furthermore, our region continued to witness political crisis, social upheavals, and traumatic outcomes, not to mention the very tragic conflict in my home country, Sudan, which is unfolding now as we speak, which all of this unfortunately continues to plague our societies and countries. At ERF, we recognize that the stakes are higher than ever before, and we strongly believe that we have an opportunity to inform policy processes towards a real systematic change. Subscribing to the premise that good policy is conditional on good research and well-informed processes. ERF systematically engage ERF fellows to determine the themes of future conferences. And this theme came out as a result of a consultation with the research fellows, virtually, of course, because we the last conference, the 28th annual conference, was held virtually. But it came as a result of this consultation that our community were concerned about the lack of growth and the debt instability and the overall macroeconomic challenges that are faced by our countries and society. So as a result of this consultation, we decided to dedicate this conference to this theme. And as we do, we always engage not only our research community, but also go beyond that and engage the stakeholders in our society, governments, civil society, and the like. As they say, a number speaks louder than words, and this year, the achievement reflected in the annual report that I would encourage you to take a look at, and it was sent to all of the our fellows. This report is truly remarkable. To initiate systematic change, this report contains considerable achievements in terms of the issues that we are handling now and our societies are grappling with. So research is important, but then also policy outreach. And so the activities on the research and data fronts, so the research agenda focused on pertinent issues pertaining to macroeconomic challenges, but not only confined to macroeconomic challenges. Also social protection, overall development concerns, political economy, digital transformation, and climate change. At large, ERF managed 90 projects engaging 151 researchers across the core themes area, and data portal hosting a total of 160 data sets. The flagship theme that defines this project, which merits particular attention, is debt stabilization in partnership with Finance and Development Lab at the University of Paris. We issue a report which will be presented shortly on Embarking, a Path of Renewal, produced by the MENA Commission on Stabilization and Growth, constituted by FDL and the ERF. On the communication and policy outreach front, ERF has built an outstanding reputation and convening power as a leading forum in the entire region. An impressive set of activities connecting people and ideas, convening forums, debates and discussions based on evidence-based research, attracted more than 5,500 participants last year. The ERF 29th annual conference, this conference, revisiting macroeconomic management in times of crisis and beyond. In addition to hosting prominent plenary speakers, it featured 50 conference papers by some 130 researchers presented in 29 conference sessions, attracting 950 plus participants. ERF publication record is equally impressive, with 100 working papers, 100 policy publication, 10,000 newsletter subscribers, and a campaign portfolio reaching 1.15 million emails, extending ERF outreach and uptake. The outstanding record of achievements would have not been feasible without the unwavering commitment of our partners. I will start with the 4 fundamental partners who have been all along partners of ERF since it is initiation: the Arab Fund for Economic and Social Development, Ford Foundation, the IDRC, International Development Research Corporation, the Canadian International Development Research Corporation, and the World Bank. But over the years, ERF has managed also to broaden its partnership. So I should also mention very fruitful partnership with our sister organization in Sub-Saharan Africa, the African Economic Research Consortium, the French Agency for Development, Carnegie Corporation of New York, European Commission, International Labour Organization, ISA Institute of Labour Economics, and of course, the Finance and Development Lab, the co-sponsor of this, this project with ERF, this report, UNICEF for their invaluable contribution and for enabling the ERF to anchor its partnership beyond the Big Four to enhance resilience and robustness. Following a special thanks to ERF Board of Trustees, 2017-2021, the former board, for visionary leadership. A warm welcome is extended to our new Board of Trustees that will be in reign from 2022 to 2027, to the ERF family to continue the journey to better serve our region. I am also particularly grateful to our partners in success, our advisory committee, our affiliates, and the entire network, and our management and staff. Building on outstanding ERF success in 2022, ERF is ready to embark on an ambitious research and communication agenda with particular attention to emerging challenges, strengthening research capacity and extending, deepening the knowledge of the regional context to provide independent, evidence-based policy options and recommendations. ERF would continue to build on its transformative capacity to connect ideas and people. The annual report, as I mentioned, is online and can be accessed, and I would once again encourage you to take a look at it. Mr. Chairman, let me finally conclude by saying that the ERF 29th Annual Conference, this conference, Future of MENA Development Path, Risks and Opportunities in an Emerging World Order, is organized around plenaries and concurrent sessions, and the details are found in the agenda, and I would encourage you to attend all the plenaries as well as the parallel sessions that are of interest, and they are diverse enough, hopefully, to account for diverse interest of our community. So let me stop here and once again extend our thanks and appreciation to the Nile University for hosting this 29th annual conference.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ibrahim. And I think we're going to start right now the first plenary session on time. I have somebody who is basically keeping the time for me. When we were asked by some of our participants if this is going to start at the international time standard or the local time standard, I believe we have the answer. We are starting on the international standard. I'm saying this because some of my faculty came late. That's why I just mentioned this. Let me say that this group needs to be recognized. Some people here have actually flying time over 18 hours in order to come here. Some people drove, some people flown for an hour or two, but we really have a very long list of people coming from all the different continents. We have also to acknowledge the people who have been, as I said, lured by executive position, because they are very much the one who is giving us the practicality. They have been in this forum for a long time. They've been attracted by their own government. We'll actually have somebody in the audience who was attracted, or maybe he was lured to run even for the presidency in one of the country. I don't want to mention names, but a lot of people here appreciate the fact that we have this great mix of people who have been holding different positions, not only in their own government, but also in international organization. We have folks who have been leading the ISQA, for instance. We have been having people here who have been very active as executive in multilateral financial institution. The list of the people who are in the audience here is very, very long. I appreciate all people coming from Ramon de Soto from Chile, and all the way to our friend from the United Arab Emirates. Of course, Tunisian, Algerian, Moroccan, and the gamut are here. We really appreciate your coming here, and we are very proud and happy that you have joined. Let me just give Dr. Ibrahim Al-Badawi proper introduction in order to do his plenary session number 1. Dr. Ibrahim is the MD for the ERF since 2017. The managing director hold only two terms. He is in his second term, and very recently, from 2019 to 2020, he was recruited as the Minister of Finance and Economic Planning at the Republic of Sudan. He is Professor Emeritus of University of Khartoum. He was director at the Economic Policy and Research Center in Dubai for a long period of time. He was a lead economist in the World Bank since 1989. It's a very long period of time. He is also, by the way, an honorary professor of finance at Nile University. So we are really very proud and very happy to have Dr. Ibrahim joining us and giving us the first plenary session that is entitled Embarking on a Path of Renewal, the MENA Commission on Stabilization and Growth, Perspective and Feedback from Policy Community. Dr. Ibrahim, you have 15-20 minutes, and then we'll go for the commentators.
Thank you. This report, Embarking on a Renewal Path, is a product of a commission constituted, as I said, by the Finance for Development Lab and the Economic Research Forum. And the principal investigator of this project is Professor Ishaq Dewan, who is the director of the Finance for Development Lab, and of course, a long time research fellow of the Economic Research Forum. And it came out, as I said, as a result of the consultation that we have had with our General Assembly, which is constituted by the research fellows, and that the majority of the participants in the 28th annual conference reckoned that the macroeconomic challenges, especially the issue of debt sustainability and the lack of growth and the overall challenges that face our region, merits a very careful consideration as a theme for the next conference, which is this conference. And so Ishaq and I and our colleagues, we decided that maybe we need to do something innovative, because we have been in the business of writing papers and producing reports and holding workshops and conferences. But what we really needed this time is to have a well thought out, hopefully an authoritative statement reflecting the perspective of the region. The region in terms of their, the policymakers, stakeholders, thinkers and researchers and so on. So we decided to constitute a commission. And this commission, and of course, very importantly, we decided to very rigorously observe gender balance. So we selected 6 countries, and from each country we have 2 notable personalities, either former policymakers, come researchers, or active researchers, and fully committed to a gender balance. So we have 12, or about 12, and from each of the 6 countries. The 6 countries themselves represent a very important blend of countries that are energy importing countries facing the challenges which we are concerned about, particularly the debt overhang and the challenge of debt sustainability. These countries are Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, Morocco, Tunisia, and Sudan. And the selection not only reflect that they face similar challenges, but they also represent a varied group of countries. You have Egypt, Morocco, and Jordan. These are countries that enjoy institutional stability, political and otherwise. They still face challenges, but they actually have the privilege of continuity and longevity of the socio-institutional political system. And then we have 2 countries in which the political order is very substantially challenged, Lebanon and Sudan. And then a country in between that's in the state of transition. Sometimes, it comes closer to, at the beginning, perhaps to the, path of stability, but then more recently, perhaps, maybe, unfortunately, veering towards instability and so on, which is Tunisia. So this is a very interesting blend. And as I said, we have a distinguished group of commissioners. We held about 8 weeks of consultations managed by Ishaq and our management team. And what we did was we invite experts, not only on macroeconomics and debt management and monetary and fiscal reforms, but also on other issues that are very important in order to give the macro reform credibility about igniting and sustaining reforms. So we address issues like, for example, how to respond and take advantage of the opportunities availed by climate change and environmental responses and sustainability, mitigation and adaptation issues. Social issues like female labor force participation, which is, of course, our region, unfortunately, among the lowest indicators in the region. Labor market issues, of course, institutional issues, and so on and so forth. So we came up with a report not only based on our own research, but also on deliberation and participation of experts, and So the Commission came up with 4 fundamental messages. which basically provided the basis for this report. The first message is that the current path leads to financial crisis, but austerity only adjustment leads to social crisis. And we think that this is a very fundamental conclusion, because actually in socially mobilized societies in the aftermath of the Arab Spring, you cannot really talk about macroeconomic reform, exchange rate reform, and so on, which naturally we entail, and fiscal reform, austerity. You have to give the society, a horizon that things will become better, and that you could actually ignite growth and sustain it. So the two had to go hand in hand. But this is not an easy thing. It requires considerable effort at all levels, technical, policy-wise, as well as, of course, in terms of outreach with the society. The IMF programs that work out, this is the second message, are not sufficient. We need a national renewal plan credible enough to ignite growth. And what I like most actually in this one is that you need to anchor expectation, you need to change expectation. So if only we do reform because we wanted to deal with the issue of debt and it will not be enough. So the IMF programs as they stand will not be sufficient. We need a business plan. We need a national renewal plan. The third message is that considerable growth potential is available, is possible. Progress macro is possible. Modern state is also possible and important. Democratic market, which is meaning that we have to eschew crony capitalism, and that opportunity has to be expanded in order to have a democratic market. High technology, like what the Nile University is trying to do at the level of education, to produce the future generation of the high-tech experts that will actually power the high-tech economy. Issues of global warming are challenges, but then also provide opportunities. And then the importance, as we learn from the war on Ukraine, the relocalization is important, in response to the deglobalization phenomena. That actually we need to build our own. We need to be open and continue to be globalized as much as we can. We have to recognize the reality that global value chain and supply chain are likely to be disrupted by international conflicts and so on. So we need to build the capacity for regional supply chain. So the fourth message is economic reforms are eminently political. It's a political process. So we need to entice opposition, involve them, mobilize support to generate trust and confidence in the future. And I think this is an important point also because, we know political reform is not really a technical exercise. And this is a lesson that has been learned over the years by both sides of the debate or of the relationship, the IMF and the World Bank and other development institutions. They have learned, for example, the World Bank since the days of Jim Wolfenson, when some of us were there at the bank, the poverty reduction strategy and the policy framework for development were comprehensive development framework, CDF, were considered very important initiatives in order to enhance and legitimize economic reforms. The IMF also recently also did the same. But on our side also, in our societies, we need to do the same, in the sense that economic reforms need to be explained and need to be debated widely. and also to generate buy-in and support by the society. And I think there is a very important point which I think Ishaq made and we adopted in the report, which is that if you actually just decide to devalue the currency because the currency is overvalued, and you did that as a technical exercise, it will still not do the trick, because you need to change expectations of the private sector. If the private sector sees that the exchange rate was reformed as a result of a debate and consultation, and the stakeholders knew that actually they will benefit from it, and the losers are also expect compensation and so on and so forth, then this actually will create the kind of credibility that will anchor and change expectation, and the private sector will start to invest. For the interest of time, and because I know that this will come in the following session that will focus on research, I will not spend time on discussing numbers and figures, so I will just go straight to some of the main themes in order to actually support these messages. For example, this is the context. It's very clear that actually if you take a very basic debt sustainability analysis baseline, or if you of course take historical trend, take historical conditions, or if you account for the shocks, that the picture is very dire for the 6 countries. All through, Sudan is a HIPC country in deep crisis, and it needs support, it needs help. But then also Lebanon, and this goes with the case that actually these countries are in really deep crisis. And then you have even the other countries, Egypt, Jordan, and Tunisia. They also face similar challenges, and debt sustainability is not at all assured under any kind of assumptions, especially the assumption that the more too ambitious assumptions, especially the one that takes into. The only country that actually appears to be better in terms of this sustainability is Morocco. And then of course the other 2 countries, Jordan and Egypt, under the most optimistic scenario. So there are lessons to be had from Lebanon and lessons on how to manage crises. I will just look at the managing crisis. Is to avoid capital flight. Multiple exchange rates is very devastating. And I experienced that in Sudan during my reign as a minister, where the parallel market ran supreme, and the official exchange rate and the central bank were really a sideshow because of the extreme premium and the insistence of the government to maintain the parallel exchange rates. Find rapidly political agreement on loss distribution to fix the banking sector. Banking are running, they have balance sheet problems, and so they basically take the whole economy at ransom, because you are unable to reform the monetary policy, and so this has to be done at the very early stage. Rebuild the state finances. Many of our countries, actually, the fiscal effort is very deplorable for a middle-income country. That's very important. But then also the priority in terms of the allocation of the budget, especially protecting the poor and ensure basic services. Most importantly, build a credible growth strategy that can back a deal to create hope for the future. Credible growth strategy so that the society would actually be prepared to bear the short-term cost in return for the in return for a better future. In terms of the debt reduction, there's a very interesting conclusion associated with the type of debt that prevailed in the region. That restructuring debt is not necessarily favorable to debt workout, because much of the public debt is domestic, external debt largely multilateral, and some bilateral and market debt. To finance reform, we need new funds. So we need to engage the IMF, and we did when we actually presented this report as part of the annual meeting. And our good friend Jihad Azour, the director of the Middle East Department at the IMF, attended and actually was quite, willing to level with the Commission report in terms of that multilateral institutions needs to be more generous, especially the IMF, about this crisis, to deal with this crisis. Big need to increase internal effort, increase saving rate, increase tax revenue, and increase labor force participation, especially female labor force participation. So these are very important, takeaways. The IMF alone is not an answer. This, of course, let me start with the challenges in terms of both status quo and austerity-only adjustment path leads to crisis, as we already said. So inaction, obviously, business as usual, leads to financial crisis, no doubt about it. But austerity alone stabilizes debt only in the very short term and at the cost of high social tensions. Growth is the only solution. So failing to develop convincing response raised the threat of a vicious cycle of further decline, political turmoil, and social polarization. As we I think all agree, IMF is not the only answer. IMF support will be necessary, but not sufficient. It needs to be more generous to attract complementary flows, but it also needs to make conditional on launching credible national saving strategies. Basically, I think this is a call for the IMF to be a little bit more developmental, and perhaps maybe to converge closer to the World Bank. I'm a bit biased, but for being former World Bank staff. But I think the IMF is hopefully considering seriously these issues, because, for example, exchange rate devaluation has never been a very important instrument, in the IMF conditionality. And so I think the role of the exchange rate as an instrument to invigorate growth in the short run needs to be perhaps maybe highlighted more and given more prominence. So, message 2, a critical juncture, build a national renewal plan. Adjust expenditure to limit primary fiscal deficit and improve quality of spending. Igniting growth by activating structural reform and expectation shift. Political adjustment to get domestic support is central, facilitated by igniting growth. I think these are all very important. And I think a very important innovation about the importance of igniting growth is that I know, for example, from yesterday, our good friend, Dr. Abla Abdel Latif, she thinks that institutional reform in Egypt is being misconceived as taking too long time. And she argues that it can actually be done in a relatively maybe shorter time. Nonetheless, I think the idea is that broad-based institutional reform takes time. But igniting growth can actually align the political economy and give some space for the policymakers to be able to introduce a robust institutional reform in the medium to longer run. So igniting growth is really very critical, and I think this is very important message as part of this recommendation. Reduce unnecessary expenditure. Again, we are in the, this is message 3, which has 2 components. From subsidies to social safety net. And the case of Sudan is quite interesting. Of course, it is being disrupted now and so fundamentally derailed. Because, we used to have, during the last waning days of the former regime, They tried to entice the urban middle class by introducing, exorbitant fuel and other commodity subsidies, which accounted then for about 1/3 of the budget. And after the December Revolution, which this is what we call in Sudan December Revolution in 2018, the new transitional government introduced an agenda focused on removing commodity subsidies, but directly empowering Sudanese people through budgets, through family support program. And the international community responded vigorously and provided about $1 billion to support this agenda. So this is very important, and I think is a good model to think about. Then the reform of the wage bill and cost of domestic debt, which obviously can be deflated if countries can actually consider meaningful and credible exchange rate reform. Improve investment in human capital, improve investment in infrastructure, tackle climate change, improve efficiency of expenditure. Let me move very quickly, just to the last 2 or 3 slides. Short-term policies of igniting growth, pro-growth expenditure, stable macro, pro-business monetary policy, exchange rate and interest rate, improve investment of the overall business climate, initiate medium-term renewal policies to signal seriousness, and then, of course, unleash old and new growth opportunities, including, for example, private sector development, but then also expansion of public services, digitalization, relocalization of supply and value chain, infrastructure, climate adaptation, regional cooperation. And let me very quickly here also extend appreciation to our colleagues from the IDRC and Ariane, that in the context of the relocalization, we are actually doing a study in collaboration with the African Economic Research Consortium, looking at the potential for creating regional supply chains between countries, Egypt and Sudan, Morocco and Senegal, Kenya and Ethiopia, South Africa and Mozambique, as example to mention a few. Finally, build political support nationally, regionally, and globally. Political activism is central. Political reforms is needed. Regional and global cooperation. I'm sure my colleagues, distinguished panelists, will elaborate a little bit on these issues. So for the interest of time, allow me not to elaborate on them. Basically economic reform, political reform, that, what we need to do, and in terms of the expanding the economic and investment base in terms of the region. So thank you very much for your patience, and looking forward to the contribution of the panelists.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ibrahim. This is very elaborate reports, and it does give a lot of food for thought, and it really could benefit a lot of countries in the region. And it seems like most of the countries in the region are suffering from one or the other of the symptoms that has been given. The intervention of the IMF seems to be very controversial right now, and just on the point of the difference between the IMF and the World Bank, because it seems nobody from the IMF here is going to defend it. I think Mahmoud is coming this afternoon, but it seems like the IMF is basically doing its mandate, and the mandate of the IMF is treating the disequilibrium, and that will lead most of the time to fiscal space that is not very increasing. And then in this case, when the IMF comes with their recipe that will call for the correction of the deficit, budget, and balance of payment and the like, the country will turn into the World Bank because of its mandate in order to find the solution. So it's a very distinct difference between the two. Let me introduce our first commentator, His Excellency Dr. Omar Razaz, former Prime Minister of Jordan. Dr. Razaz took the office actually of the Minister of Education back in 2017, and then he was again accepting the Prime Minister position from 2018 to 2020, but he has a very long history between the academia as an AUB faculty of engineering. Actually, I didn't know that, Dr. Omar, because I'm surrounded by engineers in this university, and we had a lot of contention. Dr. Razaz holds a PhD from Harvard in planning, and he holds a master's degree in city planning from MIT. He has been, as I mentioned, in the public domain for a very long period of time. He was, among other things, director of Jordan Social Security Corporation between 2006 and 2010. He served as director of Jordan Strategy Forum and Jordan Ahli Bank in 2017 when he joined the Hani al-Malki government at the time. Dr. Razaz is, in addition to being a great friend, has been very instrumental with the ERF in many projects, and his task right now is to comment on Dr. al-Badawi's keynote speech and the report of MENA Commission on Stabilization and Growth. Dr. Omar, you have 10-15 minutes, and then we'll move on.
Thank you very much. I'm really delighted to be here. Thank you for the Nile University for hosting us, and for ERF and FDL and all of you. I think this is a special context and a special group where we don't have to go back to the basics, and we can think at a critical time that the region is going through and the world is going through, revisiting old concepts that we thought were taken for granted, but we realize they have to be revisited. I'm gonna focus on the fourth element of the four recommendations, basically the political part, because historically we've seen these adjustments mostly as fiscal, financial exercises, monetary exercises, but we all know that ultimately this is a political exercise, because there are winners and losers and horizons, and how long do you go? How do you convince those who stand on the other side, etc.? And this is precisely why these adjustments have either not produced the growth impact that we hope for, or have descended into chaos and conflict. So I'm going to just elaborate a little bit on so where do we go from here? And what I'm going to say is really more asking questions than having any great answers. And this is the right group to be having this exercise with. So as Dr. Ibrahim showed, the future is bleak. We all know that for the region. The fiscal monetary situation in many of the countries is very problematic. But that doesn't mean that there is no way out, that there is nothing we can do, that we can just play it the way we have done for the last decades. And I will just borrow from a statement that I really like, I love, from Howard Zinn, where he says, confident that we are confident not that the world will get better, but that we should not give up the game before all the cards have been played. And he uses that metaphor of a game, of a, you know, it's a battle of, you have to play your cards, and we are here thinking about how best to play our cards so that our countries of the region can avoid the ultimate slippery slopes that we have seen all over the region and in the world. So if we acknowledge that all economic reforms are also political exercises by nature, then what have we learned, and what can we learn from what's happening around the world? It's been impressive, actually, and I've been trying to catch up on reading after I've left office. It's been how much we've moved from the 1990s till today, in the sense that the trajectory towards political liberalism, towards market economies, etc., which caricatured by the Fukuyama statement, the end of history, how certain we were in the 90s that things are going in a certain direction, and how uncertain we are today about anything. Globalization or democratization or all of these things that seemed to be certain. In fact, there is very interesting literature coming out that looks at what have we learned. And the countries we have in the region, which are neither democracy, not democracies, and vary on the scale of autocracy, if you will. What is the experience? And it's a very risky place to be in. The term, I think you all know that I've been looking at is the term anocracies, which are neither democracies nor strong autocracies as in a strong state. And this group is a very vulnerable group. It can easily descend into chaos, easily descend into civil war, easily descend to start a democracy. And the lesson learned is the faster you go and the more ambitious you are, the more likely it will sort of unravel and lead to worse. So what do we do? What are we saying? How do what do we recommend? How fast do we move? And I have a few perhaps proposals or impressions coming from the experience both in academia but in the politics of it as well. So one thing that we need to emphasize as civil society, private sector, and state organizations is that the old tools that were used in the 70s, 80s, and 90s until now are old tools. They are not going to solve the problems that we face today. This is a very hard transition, by the way, especially for the state, because all the tools it has are the old tools and it's used to them. And this reminds me of a Gramsci statement when he said, the past has not died, and the future cannot be born. We are stuck between the past that has not died and the future that cannot be born. And I see it constantly in the instruments that our states of the region use every time there is a conflict, or every time there is a varying opinion, every time there is a sense of the opposition, CSOs, the civil society organizations rise up. The instruments that we use are all the instruments that we used in the 70s and 80s and 90s. And it's time, and I think it is happening in some cases. It is happening in Jordan. It is happening in Morocco. I think it is happening in, it's interesting. See, to what extent is there a realization that, okay, we need the status quo ante is not sustainable, we need to find a different one. That realization has to happen by the state, has to happen by civil society, maybe that had dreams and aspirations that might not be realistic, has to happen by the private sector, so that the private sector also asks the bigger question about how do we engage in a proper way. And we have a problem with the private sector in most of our countries, where it is either crony capitalism very close to the state, or it is the informal sector that has no voice. So voice is an important issue for all of these actors. So, and the public, in the case of Jordan and many of the semi-rentier states, I think, needs to realize that the hope is not to go back to the past where the state employs all of the youth in the public sector. That's also, so we need to wean ourselves as a state, as a society, of all of the things that we had carried with us, and that this is not going to happen again. The old instruments are not going to work. So the question, the big question is, can we, within the very limited time framework for a lot of the issues, can we start to create that path? This whole project is called a sort of a path for renewal. Is this the time, is this the opportune time to start creating that dialogue and creating the consensus? And it's not a consensus, actually, it's a confliction, it's a contestation, but also collaboration and accommodation of each other. As we arrived at a certain level of maturity that would allow us to do that. And we can think of many countries, Greece, Mexico, etc., where they've had real financial crisis, real monetary crisis, but they've been able, through these institutions, to create the environment, to create a dialogue that would arrive at new bargains, if you will, new social contracts that are possible. The challenge, I think, for all of us is the very low level of trust that exists. And if you look at the literature of trust, there are no easy answers. You cannot build trust out of nothing. You cannot build trust if there is suspicion of the motives of the others. And the only thing we can come up with, actually, is this repeated game of small incremental changes that assure each other that there is a credible vision that we could agree on, and a repeated game that would get us there. In our limited experience and short term in government in Jordan, with the COVID crisis, within the first 3-4 weeks of COVID, the social media was full of rumors that were very hurtful. They were rumors about whole areas that were infected, whole hospitals that were infected, the numbers of victims, the numbers, you know, and the deniers, of course, and it was a mess. And it was at that point that I sat with the Minister of Health and the Minister of Information, and I said, look, we need to find a way to influence the person. This is very dangerous, what's going on. I asked them to show up every day at the end of the day and make a statement about the number of cases, the number of deaths, where they're happening, etc., what we know. And we agreed that whether the numbers is 1,000 or 10,000, we would go out and say that. And within weeks, I really observed, and it was very documented, so how people started reverting to that, the press conference at the end of the day, where the Minister of Health would come up and say, today there is 0 cases. Or the next day he would say there are 500. But the fact that we did it consistently, that we were saying the truth, built that small area. I don't want to exaggerate, but this was a small experiment of how you can actually first disclose information in a way that people can believe you, then start dialogue about the possibilities going forward, establishing the principles of accountability. We know democracy is a, is a bad word in many places in this region, but where else do we go? Well, at least let's build accountability mechanisms. And there are ways to make institutions, service institutions, health and education more accountable to citizens. And there are ways to decentralize. I'm always amazed about our region, how, you know, we have municipal elections in some of our countries, but we don't give the municipalities any role to play really at the local level. So if we want to go that route of building trust, create it at the local level, shorten the distance between the policy maker and the citizens. So I'm sorry I took maybe more than my time, and I'll just end with, you know, we have all of this literature that is revisionist, if you will, looking at the experience, and I will end with Darren Akomoglu and Robinson's book. It's called The Narrow Corridor, and it's a narrow corridor. They're talking about democracy in the world being a very narrow corridor. Easily you can go towards a dictatorship, or you can go towards chaos. In our region, we know it too well, tyranny versus anarchy, the choice that we're faced with. So how do you figure out how to go through that corridor and grow through it, where the state gets stronger, but stronger in the ways we agree on, stronger the rule of law, and society gets stronger, but they don't sort of, you know, they collaborate and they move forward, and they provide checks and balances. And when I read the book, and I read about the corridor, the narrow corridor, and I thought of our region, instead of a narrow corridor, what I see is a tight rope that our region has to walk, with different people with different interests poking you as you're going at that tight rope and trying to push you either right or left. So we have a very, very, very challenging period coming ahead of us. We have to realize that. But there is at least that tight rope which we have to hang on to and hopefully get somewhere. And I look forward to the rest of this conference to try to find some answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Omar. Thank you, Dr. Omar, very much. I think we're going to go to the second commentator, Ariane Dehan. Ariane is the Senior Program Specialist at Canada's International Development Research Center, the IDRC, based in Ottawa. I think the weather now is much better here, Ariane. I just heard from my friend from Canada that the snow is still there. Is it true that they still have snow in Ottawa? No?
No, but Canada it's a big place, so I'm sure there's snow somewhere.
Somewhere. Ariane's current work focus on supporting the southern-based research to integrate climate and gender equity consideration. I notice all of his work is in the right places. He also worked in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and for sustained recovery and transition to the low-carbon economy. All of these are very much appreciated. In addition to a project, IDRC GROW, on women economic empowerment, he published and taught on social policy in development context, labor migration, social inequality, and also in the aid area. Ariane, you have 10 minutes to 15 in order to comment on Ibrahim's keynote speech. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's truly an honor, and I'm humbled to be on this distinguished panel. Thank you to the university again for hosting us. It's a wonderful occasion, and truly an honor to be here with you all. Before I start, I think it's important, as as Dr. Ibrahim mentioned, and express our solidarity with our Sudanese friends and colleagues, which of course is Dr. Ibrahim's heart and thoughts all the time, and appreciate the work of ERF also in that context and many other areas in the region. I think the continued support of a network like ERF's to colleagues working in such difficult. And I'm so humbled truly to see the commitment of researchers in this very difficult circumstances. So thank you, ERF, for that attention and of course for this conference. I do live in Ottawa. I do ski 5 months of the year. I love the Canadian winters, oddly, but I work for the International Development Research Centre. IDRC is a Canadian, it's a Crown corporation. It's part of the International Development Cooperation, and we have this wonderful, unique mandate of supporting research for development, supporting directly researchers working in the global South, and of course in that context. We've been privileged to work with ERF very much from its foundation, and hope to continue to do so in a context that is unfortunately continues to be challenging, and where we hope, it's our hope and our belief that the research that we support, the research, impactful research can make, and whatever modest it may be, contribution to changing that. I think the word of the corridor is quite an appropriate one. Thank you for that. This research project at the beginning of the conference, I think is one of those examples where we think the collaboration and the support that IDRC has been able to provide, the collaboration with organizations like ERF is so important. The interest to work on the issue of debt arose during the pandemic, and I think my colleagues at ERF and IDRC at the same time realized that what we were witnessing at that point of time was a series of compounding crises, and what we now I think call a poly crisis, and that's where the idea arose. We saw the growing of debt, which was not a result of the pandemic, but came to the fore, I suppose, because of the additional demands that were put on economic system, on states during the pandemic, and within that, and I almost feel like it's a group of people working on that are giving away their age. I have to say that the growth of for my own formation, the understanding how the international development system worked, the debt crisis in the 80s and how it was addressed in the 1990s was very formative, and unfortunately we are seeing that history. I was looking up, we had a contribution of an Argentinian economist in our discussion yesterday, and of course Argentinians would be the specialist in how to address debt crisis successfully or not, and what he wrote yesterday, it's not that history rhymes, it is merely repeating itself, and in a way it's not, because the situations are different, but I think it's important to say that what we do, this project was inspired by seeing that history repeat itself, and make sure that we learn the lessons from what happened there, and the things that went well and didn't go well. What we do know from the crisis, the debt crisis of the 1980s and the early 1990s, and UNICEF's report is still, for me, was quite formative on that. That was the first that looked at the cost of both the debt crisis and adjustment. That what we learned there was that not dealing with crisis like that it will be costly. One has to address this crisis, and even if those crises are being addressed, the impact of the debt crisis still will be very, very long. It will take even the most correct me if I'm wrong, even the most proactive states will feel the impacts of that crisis for many years. Thirdly, that the crisis was not just economic, and I refer to UNICEF report at the time, I think it was 1989, that first wrote out analyze the social impact of the debt crisis and adjustment. It's not just economic impact, it has distributional impact, but different groups are impacted differently. Very important, and from a Canadian perspective, under our feminist international policy, very point that we try to emphasize in the context of this, the gender impacts of those crises and how they are addressed are really very important. And the fourth thing, what we learned there is that I think the debt crisis, how that was addressed in the international community. I was fortunate to work in the UK where there was a lot of the advocacy of emphasizing there needs to be an international response to the crisis. It was really a defining moment, and it defined a lot of the structures, which I think Professor Ibrahim was referring to. The poverty reduction strategy papers was a new way of the international community engaging with the IMF, with the World Bank, with countries that were impacted by the debt crisis, and the many mistakes that were made in there. And again, I come back to there's lessons from that I think are very important to bring out. Of course, the current situation is very different. At the same time, we at this point we don't see many formal restructuring of debt yet across the world, in MENA as well in Africa, and that's I think that's not necessarily because the crisis is less severe, but because the conditions in which this is happening have changed. The structure of debt is very different, for good or bad. Much more of the debt of lower income, lower middle income countries is with the private sector now, is bondholders and so on, and that make that situation very different. But again, there are many of the questions which I know the project is addressing, and the 4 points that Professor Ibrahim made showed from the regional report, which I really recommend to everybody to read, are very important, and many of those, and that's what's now developed in the country papers, is need the local evidence to find out the how to address those issues. Again, it's very clear that one cannot not address debt, or perhaps more precisely, and Professor Diwan will speak to that, one cannot not address the underlying causes that cause debt, because maybe debt itself is not the major issue, but it's the underlying causes of that. Again, very important questions about the role of the international community, the IMF and the World Bank, and not just those, but there's also the private creditors, and there's the other bilateral agencies that influence both the IMF as well as their own lending. And again, very importantly, again, what we're seeing, what's coming out of the report, and areas that need much further analysis, is that the impact of that and the policies that follow from that, addressing the debt crisis, have very important welfare impacts. It has the distributional impacts. It affects men and women differently, different groups differently, and that's where that evidence is so important, to understand how those different policies impact different groups differently. And very much the fact that debt crisis and how it's addressed is not just an economic issue, it is a social issue, it's distribution implications, and it's very much a political issue. And that's where I come back, I think, to the importance of that evidence, because those reforms are so difficult, on even in a narrow economic sense, there will be differences of views. but it's also social, it's also political, and that again is why that local research in each specific context against that global crisis is so important. And again, that's where I see the value of this this research project. And again, I want to congratulate ERF, FDL, Professor Diwan, and all the contributors to this work. And I look forward to see and learn during this conference about the findings and how this work is evolving. Thank you again so much for hosting us. It's a pleasure.
Thank you again very much. Do you want to comment? Do you want to comment, or we'll go to the? Okay. Yeah, I think we do appreciate very much the commentary by both Dr. Razez and Mr. Rian Dehan. We are very fortunate to have the best minds in economics in this room, and we are going to try to pick these minds a bit. So I'm going to open the floor for questions, and we'll have it. I think we have colleagues with mics, Dr. Samru, and then Professor Makdisi. Okay, I'll take the row.
Yeah, thank you very much. Dr. Eldabawi's presentation was very informative, taking these 6 countries. Now, there was a comment about Lebanon. I've been there for the last 5 years, and he said, you know, it was known to be coming. And I call actually the Lebanese crisis a chronicle of a death foretold. You know, following the Gabriel Garcia Marquez novel, it started with the Syrian. It starts in 2011, 2012. It starts with the Syrian civil war and the Syrian uprising, and any issues that were, you know, in the Lebanese economy gets exacerbated. So the beginning is not 2019, it's like 2012. And from there, you know you're going to this crisis. Somebody is going to kill this person during the day, but you know, you just don't know exactly when, you know, following the Marquez novel. Now, so this is kind of now that brings me to a different point, and it's interesting to look at MENA, but I also like to look at some very successful country groupings like East Asia or Asia, okay, South Asia, East Asia, Southeastern Asia. Now, what did they do? Well, one, they refrained from fighting. They refrained from war, okay? This is a huge lesson. Now, maybe peace is also beginning to break out in this region, too. We see some new agreements between different countries that were, you know, foes, some interlocutors coming in, different interlocutors. Okay, so when I look at East Asia, all right, so this is one thing that makes, so because if you look at Lebanon, really Lebanon's woes start out with a war. Yeah. I mean, of course it had underlying problems, but they become much, much worse. 3, there's something very interesting, and William Easterly from the World Bank in a paper talked about this. In Asia, countries copy good policies. In Africa, they seem to follow or copy bad policies. Okay? You know, even Deng Xiaoping, the communist leader in 1978, went to Singapore to learn about the right development and macro policies. Japan, you know, they copied Japan, Korea copied Japan, China copied Singapore, Hong Kong, you know, they copied each other. Vietnam is copying China, India is copying, you know, this. They copy good policies. In this region, there doesn't seem to be much of that, okay? This is number 3, and maybe I say one more thing. They trade. They are linked through value-added chains. There's huge inter-regional trade, which is also missing in this area. So these are issues, before I start to look at an IMF program, I would like to think about some of these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Samru. Just for organization, people who are going to take the floor, please introduce yourself, your name and your affiliation. Dr. Samru is an economist from Turkey originally, but she is working at the AUB currently, if I am correct, and she is an elected member of the Board of Trustees of the ERF. Dr. Samir Al-Maqdisi, and we will have 4 questions and then go to Ibrahim and come back. Samir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You want to introduce myself? Not really necessary.
Should I introduce you? Dr. Samir Al-Maqdisi is at the foot I'm stepping in. He's the former chair. Samir, for people who don't know him, he is the president of AUB for some time. You also used to be the governor of the Central Bank of Lebanon. And above all, he is very prolific author. And until now, I think only a couple of weeks ago, he published his last book.
And a good friend of Hassan. Thank you. Thank you. I have a very brief, precise question that I'd like to address to both Ibrahim and Omar. Now, you talk that what we need is political mobilization to achieve those economic programs that you have been talking about, and I find the report very, very interesting, extremely instructive. Now, my question is, what does that mean? When you say political mobilization, are you assuming a change of governments? Are you assuming that you reach a democratic governance that will go ahead and implement these things? What does mobilization mean? The civil society, will you be able to do it? My second point is that we do live in the Middle East, unlike North Africa. This is a very conflictual area. There are the Palestinian issue, the Syrian issue, the refugees issue, Turks in Syria, Iran in Lebanon, and so on. Are you assuming a resolution of these issues prior to implementation? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Mungi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to all, to Ibrahim and to the team that produced this report. I have 2 points. The first one is simple. One of the pillars you presented requires that the need to reduce primary deficit. Of course, I agree, but this cannot be done through reducing expenditures. The only way should be by increasing resources. It's easy to say, but very hard to do. This is the second point. Is you already said it, but I think it's worth that we talk about it again. The main reason or the main conditions for this scheme to work, I mean, if we want to implement this sort of things, we need a strong government that is supported by the main partners that can lead and also communicate with the partners, and call it democratic or autocratic, but this is very important. The problem is that this is very easy to say and very hard to do. Economists don't know what to do about it, how to do it. Perhaps they can explain some economics to them, because this government needs also to know about economics. So if we cannot produce something to help solve this big issue, I mean, how to change institutions, how to help change the political situation in this region, we may be just talking. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mungi Boughazala is professor of economics in Al Manar University in Tunis. This group here are the Noche group, because these are the old folks who started the ERF for 30 years ago or so. So that's why you are testing my memory, but I think he got his PhD from Minnesota, that one city, and he has been very active with ERF for a very long period of time. Now is Dr. Mustafa Nabli.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to suggest an issue or to talk about an issue very quickly, both to the panel as well as to the community here sitting in this room. I think the ERF has been based, and I think the work that has the commission work illustrates based on a model which goes from research, evidence-based, to outreach, to policy making. And I would like to claim that this model is being undermined completely. It's not working. Policy making is not evidence-based anymore. Policy making in our region and many countries of our region and many circumstances is not based on research, is not based on analysis, it's based on something else. We are seeing it everywhere. Just to give you an example, recently, I don't want from nearby countries, just Turkey, how monetary policy is being made in Turkey. It has nothing to do with what we know about monetary policy, about analytical and understanding and models of monetary theory and so on. It's based on other considerations. Now, under these circumstances, if the model on which the ERF has been built is not working, I think ERF has to step back. We have to step back, all of us, and think about this. What is the issue with policy making in our region? How can we influence or hope to influence? We are doing commission on stabilization and development, a new path where we are developing maybe great ideas and so on. But do we really know that this is going to have any impact, given the way policy making is being done today? I think we have got to step back and think about it. And I invite ERF really to put this issue on the table now, because, and it's really amazing how this movement of populist politics and others is really undermining the model on which ERF has been built over the last 30 years, and maybe undermining it for the future as we follow. So I wanted to just raise a flag here and call on us all to really think about these issues and see how we can really find a way. Maybe it's a narrow corridor, as you know, Omar reminded us earlier, but it's a tough one, and we need to pay attention to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mustafa. For people who don't know Mustafa, I thought you have to ask Atif. There's no way you will pass. But Mustafa took the helm of the central bank in Tunisia as a governor. He has been Minister of Planning, Minister of Finance, I believe. In addition, of course, to his active political campaign that led him to be a candidate for the presidency right after 2011. I believe Dr. Atif Qobrisi, I'm going to introduce you first. Atif is a professor at McMaster University in Canada for a long time. Just to know how influential Atif Qobrisi is, he was the supervisor of the thesis of Karima Krayem and Gouda Abdel Khalaq. So this is how impressive his CV is. Atif.
My age. I want to bring two technical aspects here, and these have really been quite helpful in several countries. The one that seems to have been...
Can you raise the voice a little bit?
Yeah, the one that seems to have really worked is the debt to GDP ratio. And all this logic that we have to increase growth is to basically make a growth higher than the real rate of interest. In the sense, the rate of the interest is going to explain how the deficit is rising and how the debt is rising. But you want GDP to increase more. But there is a critical number that is missing, especially in our area. And this is the elasticity of government revenue with respect to GDP. The only way you're going to get this working, there was really some literature about the optimal ratio of debt to GDP, about 60%. At any time you go above 60%, you really get into the dangerous zone, and that it should be targeted to make sure that this ratio is never exceeded. But practically, the countries that have succeeded in dealing with this debt and maintaining that ratio were countries that have been quite cognizant of the relationship of the revenue to GDP. And quite a number of our countries, either because of people who escape paying taxes or being less progressive, and there was quite a bit of talk about the fiscal compression and all these difficulties where the GDP would rise, but the revenues never rise. You know, they have to reconsider to a great extent how can we get our taxation on a progressive basis so that when the GDP rises, these revenues would rise sufficiently to create the surpluses that would reduce the debt.
Thank you very much. I think we're going to go to the panel now for a quick response. We'll start with Brahim and then Dr. Omar and Arian, Dr. Arian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And many thanks for the very important insight that we had now. I would like just to focus on Mustafa Nabli's point, because it concerns me much more as a managing director, and I think he's raising a very profound point. And let me underscore his point by making a comparison to the African Economic Research Consortium, our sister organization, which was established about 5 years earlier. And I should say that despite the very commendable effort that the ERF Secretariat, Yasmin Fahim and her team, and Dr. Shireen Ghunaim and her team, producing considerable research and making, you know, exceptional effort to uptake through variety of modalities and so on. If the comparison is made, we fall short, as Mustafa said, because of the context. There are some exceptions. For example, I would say Professor Raji Asad's work on labor market, I think, has made considerable contribution. I attended a seminar on a labor market tracker attended by policymakers from Egypt, including the Minister of Labor and others. I think on these particular issues, I can see that we are making an impact. Macroeconomics is very difficult to convey in an environment that's not open along the lines that we suggested here. For example, exchange rate reform is not seen as an instrument to ignite growth and increase competitiveness. And this requires a much involved discussion with civil society, and it brings some touchy political issues. So perhaps ERF, I think, has been very successful on maybe sectoral issues that are less controversial, but on macroeconomics, broad development issues, there are problems. And these are very much contingent on the political space that's available. And I just want to give you 2 examples. The ARC has been able to convene on average about 20 ministers from sub-Saharan Africa or governors of central bank in an instrument called Senior Policy Seminar, where policymakers would be invited and research will be presented to them, and they ask them 3 questions. One is this research useful to you? What are the major gaps that you would like the research to address? And also give us your perspective about how you want to, you know, conduct policy and so on. And no limits on that. And this is, Shireen and I have been talking about this. How can we actually do an instrument like this in our region, where we can have 10, 15 ministers of finance to come for 3 days so that we can actually discuss these issues. Why exorbitant interest rate is very bad for the economy, why, for example, the fiscal structure is not really sustainable or developmental. We cannot do that. And this, I think Mustafa is right on this. The second thing is the executive director, the late executive director of ARC, Professor Ben Ndulu, became the governor of the Central Bank of Tanzania. And he talked to his colleagues, the Reserve Bank of South Africa. So in a course of 6 months, about 10 leading central banks put together contribution of about, I don't remember, about $1 million or $2 million, no questions asked, with no conditions or anything, every year to the benefit of the African Economic Research Consortium. So we need to work hard on that. But I think also just engaging policymakers as well as future policymakers who are now our researchers, hopefully will eventually maybe make an impact. But I think the point that Mustafa is making is important. But on the other side also, we have to continue and persevere on our effort to reach out. Hopefully that there will be future Nablis in Tunisia and in other countries who are researchers who assume position of authority. As we say in Arabic, تفاءلوا بالخير تجدوه. Thank you.
Dr. Omar.
Thank you. Maybe I'll combine the first two questions together because they are relevant. The second one with, I missed your name, I'm sorry, and yeah. Okay, the experience from Lebanon and Dr. Samir's comment. First thing, it is very important to reach some agreement about the rules of the game. And I think non-violent, not resorting to conflict and accepting that there is rule of law and monopoly of use of power in a sense that is not triggered in these conflicts. So there are some rules of engagement, if you will. And then that raises the question of who's the patron, who's overseeing this. So it's a complicated situation, and there is a lot to learn from Asia. But let me be very clear. This is not something that you're not going to have a democratic government anytime soon, and you're not going to resolve the ethnic and confessional issues anytime soon. So not at all saying, yes, we do that, fix all of these, and then create the dialogue. In my opinion and experience, there are small incremental steps that move you down that corridor or a knife's edge that start to get parties to realize that no one party is going to eliminate all the others. And then therefore we might be able to come up with a better outlook of a game if everybody plays along. And realizing what the catastrophic consequences of letting things go down the spiral. And I think, or I would hope, that the stakeholders, the various players who have resorted to force, what we are seeing today in Sudan is very unfortunate. And I wonder whether in Lebanon, in Iraq, and elsewhere, and the countries that haven't gone down that slide, like Jordan and Morocco, etc., can prepare themselves for that kind of dialogue. Now we see there is what's called Hiwar Watani taking place, national dialogue taking place in Jordan, in Morocco, I think today in Egypt. People are skeptical because of the lack of trust about, how serious is it? Is it just this is something cooked and being presented to the public, or is it a real dialogue that will lead to something? Again, going back to Gramsci, I think these staged performances are over. they're not going to be effective. So if the extent to which these are staged performances, it's a waste of time. The extent to which it is a real dialogue. In Jordan, to address the issue of lack of trust, the committee, the national committee that produced law said, okay, we will increase parties' representation in parliament over a 12-year period, and they put that into the law. So it's not just an empty promise from a government or even from the king himself. It is in the law that the party representatives will go up every cycle over the next 3 cycles. Now, this might, one, create the process, allow these institutions to mature. Jordan has not had political parties. You cannot create political parties with a push of a button. People don't, when there are polls, people don't believe in political parties, so you have to reinvent that culture gradually. Yes, it's a treacherous road. Quick 2 points on Mustafa and Atif on the critical self-evaluation of ERF. I think what ERF has done is extremely important. The policy, the evidence-based policy making is something we need to keep reminding, especially populist leaders, that, you know, hey, there is some logic. But I think there is an element missing that we need to add. And I've experienced it myself when I became the head of the Social Security Corporation in Jordan. On my first day in office, I looked at the ILO report about the sustainability of the security system, and it was alarming. It was 2006 at the time, and it said that by 2016, the Social Security will go bankrupt, basically. And I said, you know, I was panicking, and I immediately asked the board and the ministers and the government and nobody wanted to talk about it. But I pushed it, and people were, I felt like very quickly we were proposing solutions. That was my mistake and I was proposing solutions based on this ILO report to problems that people didn't realize existed. So we as a group, let me claim, we tend to, because we go through the analysis and we have the solution and we run with the solution, when the stakeholders don't believe that there is a problem. So we need to spend time taking these outcomes. And people didn't, you know, when I would talk about the actuarial study, people would stare at me, you know, and it took me a while to think I should not say actuarial study. I should give simple examples of how when you put money and you take out money, what happens, etc. And we started simplifying the notion. And at one point we start talking about, you know, as a symbol, the olive tree. This is something you want one generation after the other, and you don't want to cut it off and turn it into firewood. You want to be able to. So you have to speak the language in different terms to different audiences, and I think this is very important. And lastly, just a technical thing on Atif's question. The tax burden and the tax systems that we have are very regressive in the region. And this is part, you know, we all, I think, rely essentially on sales and VAT taxes. And it's, in Jordan, it was a mix of a blessing and a curse that we had. The IMF requested that we make income tax viable. And we had to do it within a very short framework. And it got passed before the pandemic. So the revenue on wealth and income was very important to make sure that GDP to that revenue to GDP is related to different instruments that do different things at different times, it really helped us fiscally not to fall into the trap of, because the whole economy stopped. So, my recommendation is for those of you who are going to be in office as ministers of finance or prime ministers, don't start with a tax in your first 3 months of a term of a government. It's suicidal. But that's the situation we were put on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, if you have any comment, excellent. I don't want to be standing between you and the coffee break. There is one question by I think Noha. Yes, Dr. Noha. If one question and then we'll give you the break.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Hassan, for having us. Thank you for putting together that wonderful platform where we can actually hear and be heard. My name is Noha Shakir. I'm the Secretary General of the Egyptian Fintech Association, the Vice President of the Africa Fintech Network. I'm a Gobi investment partner, and I'm also a Senior Climate Finance Advisor to the UK Aid. One comment and one question. The first comment may actually be a bit not mainstream, or could be a little bit not accepted. Debt in itself is not an issue. How we manage debt is the issue. The biggest economies in the world are the most indebted economies. But when you use debt to close fiscal and like budget gaps, rather than putting that money into productive use, creating jobs and pushing the growth in the economy, this is when problems actually start. So let us just put that in the right perspective. That is not the issue. How we manage that is the issue in there. The question in here, definitely what got us here is not going to take us there. There is like the stage of growth, building that trajectory for the region that is like more inclusive, more sustainable, and the like. So the question is, where should we start? And on the project itself, is there going to be a follow-up to those findings, very comprehensive findings? Are we going to see some action plans, some sectoral views, implementation efforts, and who are we going to be engaging when it comes to that second stage? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Noah, very much. Because we have to be on time, we are going to take the question with Dr. Noha individually, but just one comment. The big nation or the big economies have the biggest debt because they can afford it. It's very misleading concept most of the time when you compare the US debt with Egypt debt. We don't have the universal currency. We don't have the machine, so to speak. So just the answer to the question, I think we'll take it. We will now take the coffee break. I think it's in the foyer, and we'll start the second plenary session at what? 11:30. Thank you very much.